What's up, class, and welcome to another video in my No Mod Shop class series here on the Schooled Zone. Notice I didn't say lesson there because this video is actually going to be more of a discussion opener for the community at large. It's a video I've been wanting to make for a while now, but I guess I was waiting until I built up enough trust and faith with you guys because it could be a controversial topic, especially for the die-hard fans of Fallout. While some feathers may get ruffled, just remember that I'm open to all points of view, and more often than not, I learn as much from you guys as you learn from me. So what we're going to be discussing today is the concept of clean versus lore-friendly in terms of settlement building styles. And I do mean we, because I fully expect you guys to weigh in heavily in the comment section below. Now I'm going to approach this from both a neutral point of fact perspective, as well as give you my personal thoughts and opinions. But I very much want to hear your thoughts and opinions as long as they're constructive and not offensive. And while I'm talking about all this, I'm going to be trying to build up this glass bottom boardwalk that I started here at Sanctuary a while ago, you know, into a little outdoor bar, lounge, cafe type thingy. Been meaning to come back to this. I just have so many other settlements I'm working on simultaneously. It's kind of crazy. I don't know about you guys, but I like to build at certain places when I get struck with the mood, you know? If I stick with one build and get a little stuck, I sometimes get discouraged and want to give up. If you guys like building in the game and you ever get stuck, I highly encourage you to just leave the build alone for a while, build something entirely different somewhere else, and over time your subconscious will kind of problem solve the things for you, or at least generate new inspirations. So there's no harm in coming back to a build weeks or even months later. If anyone wonders, I do that all the time, and that's what keeps me inspired to try new things. Kind of a good metaphor for life as well, right? Now, I totally understand if it might be hard to concentrate on what I'm saying because the let's build part itself is going to be kind of interesting to watch, so you may want to watch this video twice. Once for the building inspiration and then watch it later with just the sound in the background like a podcast. And no, I'm not just saying that because I want more ad revenue. Sometimes viewers get so cynical over that stuff. No, it's because I did a build video early on in the series where I talked about the settlement size glitch, and I built a funny little paint gun pillory contraption with a rogue settler. And a lot of people commented that they couldn't concentrate on what I was saying because the build itself was so interesting. But hey, I'm always trying to find ways to meet in the middle, you know, between just standing there with my character and doing intriguing things on camera, you know what I mean? My boy Leon Lush said it best.
Now, typically I like to do really long, drawn-out intros for no other reason than I love it when obnoxious go down to the comment section and say, "Oh, video starts at 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Thank me later."
Preach, brother. So let's get into it. Clean is pretty self-explanatory. So let's first define what is so-called lore-friendly and explore that a little. So interestingly enough, when I did a Google search for the phrase lore-friendly, a lot of the early definitions of that term stemmed from heat some modders were getting when they created mods for Skyrim. There was a debate on some Nexus forums about whether mods should only enhance the lore of the game versus making it a more enjoyable experience for the player. I found that fascinating because I had imagined the term would have gone back further in history with really any fantasy medium that had a rabid fan base. You know, I was thinking like Star Wars fan fiction back in the day, or even earlier into the 20th century with like horror writers that were protégés of H.P. Lovecraft, but apparently not, as the term seems to have entered the pop lexicon more recently with video games like Elder Scrolls or Grand Theft Auto. So the idea behind the term lore-friendly seems to indicate that any style in the game needs to adhere to the general aesthetics of everything else around the landscape in order to blend in and not look anachronistic. I can understand that. Some people believe that a style choice, whether it be the look of clothing or the look of a building, needs to appear decayed, dilapidated, and generally war-torn. You know, something straight out of a Mad Max movie. I get it, you know, it's like when a child in kindergarten is assigned a coloring book. If the child decides to color the grass purple or the sky pink, the teacher quickly steps in to correct the inaccuracies. The kid quickly learns that it's not his or her fantasy world they're coloring. The world they're coloring actually belongs to a bigger collective. Many people would agree with that premise. Here's why I don't. And there are several reasons actually. For one, it's silly for a teacher to turn a kindergarten art lesson into a biology lesson, or even a social conformity lesson. If you want kids to understand why grass is green, then directly explain why. Plants contain chlorophyll, which allow them to absorb sunlight and turn it into energy. Or even more simply, plants have green skin so they can feed off the sun. The sky is blue because that's how it looks when sunlight scatters off the atmosphere. the sun would look white in outer space. Now don't confuse all that with an art lesson where you're supposed to be fostering creativity and freedom of expression. Well, I could say the same thing about settlement building styles in Fallout 4. I'll get to the immersional realism in a moment, but just to finish this point, I say build whatever the hell you want in the game, you know? If you imagine your character as a scrappy pragmatist who just wants to throw up some boards and call it shelter so he can catch some quick Z's before he heads back out on the more important aspects of the game, such as killing mutants and tracking down his son, then that's the story of your character's building style. On the other hand, if you imagine your character as more of a visionary who wants to terraform the landscape into a ray of hope for the future, then maybe your character might take the time to build a cleaner architectural style. Now, everything I've discussed so far falls under role-playing and the definitions of immersion we're assigning to the playstyle. And by the way, why am I even broaching this topic in the first place? Well, about a year and a half ago when I posted my Vault 42 build, the overwhelming majority of the comments were positive. But I certainly got a share of negative comments too. Some of them were justified as I gave way too long of an introduction to that video. You know, I should have been featuring some visually interesting footage or at least some gameplay while I was giving the backstory. It was definitely a lesson learned, but hey, that's what being a YouTuber is all about, you know, living and learning and improving. I took that feedback and I evolved. However, I did take issue with the other category of comments which fell into some variation of the criticism that my build wasn't lore friendly. That was the first time I had heard that, and I really did feel like a kid who had colored outside the lines or, you know, drew yellow mountains or flying tigers. However, I didn't change my building style to accommodate those criticisms, and I've noticed over the last year that I get a lot less of those type of lore-friendly criticisms. So I'm thinking perhaps I had a small influence on the building community to think outside the box, or you know, at least I'd like to think so. To be perfectly honest though, I'm also just not very good at building scrappy raider style settlements, or as I put it in one video, raider chic. It takes me way longer to build those types of settlements than cleaner ones, and it all comes down to the way one's brain works. I have a very organized mind, so it actually takes me effort to simulate disorganization. I tend to see things in the world visually in terms of symmetry and spacing. Some people may call that a little bit of OCD. I've never been officially diagnosed with OCD or anything, but I do think I probably fall into that side of the spectrum. I know this because I do this in my own living space. If a picture is tilted on the wall, I have to straighten it out. If there's a piece of trash in the floor, I have to throw it in the garbage. I'm definitely not a germaphobe or anything, you know, spraying Clorox and everything. You know, I'm no Howard Hughes. I just generally fall into the category of people who like an organized living space, you know, nothing extreme. Having said that, some people like a messy room. My ex-girlfriend was like that. She actually told me one time that it made her feel more cozy. I totally understood where she was coming from. A lot of people are like that, and a lot of that personality style probably has to do with how a person is brought up. When I eventually met her parents at their home, I could immediately tell they were hoarders. There was clutter everywhere. That was her upbringing, and it's what made her feel comfortable. And it makes total sense that I'm the way I am because my dad was an engineer and my mom was an interior designer. So my mom was always practicing her artistic design styles on the house I grew up in. My dad always found solutions to problems from a very scientific perspective. Now, not always, of course, but you often learn by example from your parents. And at the very least, they have an influence on your natural patterns as an adult, unless you specifically make an effort to break those habits, especially if they're bad habits. Anyway, that sort of explains why I struggle creatively to match the dystopian style of Fallout and why I like creating cleaner, more futuristic style buildings in my settlements. Not always, but in the majority of cases. However, I'm just using the building materials they gave us, and vaults and cleaner looking items are included in the game. Look no further than places like the Cabot House or the Institute. So then why can't that style be lore friendly? I mean, there's precedence for it, right? But let's veer away from opinions of style and just talk about straight pragmatics and logistics for a moment. When you open your workshop and you build something from scratch in the game, why would you want to build something that is broken or scrappy? Because the way I see it, when you build something in the workshop, you're building it from scratch. Reason, buildable items take components. When you're adventuring in the environment, you're storing junk. You're not throwing whole tables, chairs, or segments of wall into your backpack. You're collecting the materials needed to build those things from scratch at your workshop. Otherwise, they would have called it a storage garage and not a workshop. Even the term prefab just means that it's a predetermined design from building schematics. This concept is further reinforced with the upcoming Fallout 76, where your camp building system uses assembly blueprints to recreate your settlement somewhere else if you need to pack it up and move. So when you build something from scratch, by the very nature of it, it's gonna be brand new. So again, why would you want to build something broken or scrappy? Well, I can think of one very legitimate reason actually: urban camouflage. If you're role-playing a character who wants to deter settlement attacks because you want the enemies to think there's nothing of value worth taking, then that's what I would consider a deliberate and lore-friendly decision. And there are plenty of real-life examples of urban camouflage. Have you seen those car tarps that make parked luxury cars look like jalopis? Speakeasies in the 1920s would often hide elaborate bars and casinos behind raggedy pawn shops. Classic example in Breaking Bad with Gus Fring's high-tech drug lab underneath the laundromat, You get the idea. So yeah, if your character wants his or her settlement to blend in the environment on the rationale of keeping a low profile for deterrence, that makes total sense. The whole possum playing dead theory. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, in the design world, there's actually a term for that. It's called distressed. Furniture refurbishers will sometimes make items look aged on purpose to give it that classic antique look. Blue jean makers will purposely acid wash jeans so they look worn and less likely to get weird stares, I guess, During the 90s era grunge movement, flannel shirts and jeans with holes in them actually cost more than ones that didn't, you know what I mean? But you can't say the rationale is because that's how the materials naturally arise in the game. To build a concrete wall, it takes a bag of concrete mix. That's actually a prop in the game. You're just skipping over the part where you mix the concrete with water, pour it into a mold, wait for it to dry, and then stand it up in place, That would be boring, literally like the expression of watching paint dry. So that's proof right there the selected items don't just come that way. When you build a fire barrel, for example, it takes oil, steel, and wood. Those are the components. You're not pulling an already flaming barrel out of your workshop. You build it from scratch. Ironically, even items that you may already have stored in your workshop, like lamps, get rebuilt with components. The only way around that is to take the lamp out of your workshop inventory and hand place it. But then, of course, it won't light up because the circuitry was probably fried from the EMP part of the nuclear blast back in the day. So the circuitry also needs to be rebuilt. Anyway, the point of all this is not only to tell you how the mechanics work, but also to tell you that it's okay to build with whatever style you want in the game. With the addition of the Nuka World DLC, the game developers even gave you permission to add childish flights of fancy to your builds, They don't all have to be glum, dilapidated eyesores. Now don't get me wrong, I have seen some unbelievable Raider-style settlements on YouTube, many of which I couldn't even come close to designing. So to be clear, when I talk about clean versus lore-friendly, I'm not talking about clean versus distressed. Clean versus distressed is an intentional style choice. Clean versus lore-friendly, or rather declaring something as not lore-friendly, is a prejudice. And I mean that in the classic dictionary definition sense of passing judgment on something without the full breadth of knowledge or reasoning. So this is purely my opinion, of course, but I say build whatever you want in the game according to whatever strikes your fancy. Nothing is not lore-friendly because it's all lore-friendly. There are extremes, of course. I'm just talking about building with the materials we're given. If a modder were to put out an expansion pack that changed all the Nuka-Cola products, for example, to Coca-Cola products, then yeah, of course, that would be lore-breaking. But that's an extreme example and not what I'm talking about here. I'm purely talking about creativity and freedom of expression using the building blocks we were given. Come to think about it, I don't even remember seeing ball tracks in any of the missions or side quests. The ball tracks were grandfathered into being lore friendly, so to speak, with the release of the Contraptions Workshop. So you guys get the idea. Anyway, I'd love to hear your opinions on all this below. It might or might not be a controversial discussion. It's hard for me to tell at this point. I know it probably would have been a flame war if I'd put out this video a year ago, but today, perhaps not so much. So what do you think about what I said? Are there other factors or ideas I forgot to cover? Do you think Fallout 76 is going to change a lot of what we previously considered lore-friendly? Would love to hear your thoughts on all this below. Just make sure to keep your comments at least YouTube-friendly. You know what I mean? Thanks so much for watching, guys. Oh, and although I'm not finished with the Terrace Bar and Grill here, I'll definitely show you the finished version in a future episode, so stay tuned for that. If you appreciate what I was saying, or at least enjoy a vigorous debate below, then leave a like on the video and hit that notification bell for future videos of the sort. Be back soon with more fun, happy building, and class dismissed.